I never thought I'd end up in a war with my homeowners association president, but when Brenda Mitchell decided my front lawn was the perfect venue for her daughter's luxury wedding without asking me, she crossed a line I couldn't ignore. It started on a Tuesday morning in Scottsdale, Arizona, when I was drinking my coffee and checking my work emails. I'm Patrick Whitmore, a freelance software developer who moved into the Desert Bloom Estates subdivision about 2 years ago. The house was perfect, 3 bedrooms, a decent yard, and far enough from my parents in Phoenix that they couldn't drop by unannounced, but close enough for Sunday dinners. The HOA seemed reasonable when I signed the papers. Monthly fees were fair, the rules weren't too insane, and the neighborhood looked clean and well-maintained. That morning I heard voices outside my window. Not just casual conversation, but the kind of excited planning chatter that makes you immediately suspicious. I pulled back the curtain and saw Brenda Mitchell standing on my front lawn with 3 other women, gesturing wildly at my property like she owned it. Brenda was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with an aggressive blonde bob and an attitude that suggested the world existed to serve her needs. She wore white capri pants and a turquoise blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The other women were taking notes and measurements, actually measuring my lawn with one of those rolling measurement wheels. I walked outside barefoot, still holding my coffee mug. "Morning, Brenda. What's going on?" She turned to me with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Patrick, perfect timing. I was just about to knock on your door. We're planning something absolutely wonderful for the neighborhood. On my lawn," I gestured at the women who were now photographing my property from different angles. "Well, yes. You see, my daughter Melissa is getting married in 3 weeks, and we've had the most terrible situation with our original venue. They double booked us. Can you imagine? After we put down a deposit and everything. So I've been looking around the neighborhood for the perfect alternative, and your lawn is absolutely ideal. It's the biggest in the subdivision, beautifully maintained, and positioned perfectly for the afternoon light." I blinked at her, processing what she was actually saying. "You want to hold a wedding on my lawn?" "Exactly. I knew you'd understand. It'll be beautiful, probably around 200 guests. We'll have a tent, of course, and catering, a band, the works. Don't worry about cleanup. We'll have people for that. And naturally, this will count as your community service hours for the year." "Community service hours?" I repeated. "It's in the HOA bylaws, Patrick. Each household needs to contribute 12 hours of community service annually, or you can pay the $200 opt-out fee. Hosting this wedding would more than cover your obligation. Really, I'm doing you a favor." I took a slow sip of my coffee, buying time to control my temper. "Brenda, I appreciate the offer, but no. I'm not hosting a wedding on my lawn." Her smile froze. "Excuse me?" I said no. "This is my property. I didn't agree to this, and I'm not interested." One of the other women, who I recognized as Susan from the HOA board, stepped forward. "Patrick, I think you're misunderstanding. This is for the good of the community. Brenda has done so much for this neighborhood, and she's in a desperate situation. Then she can have it at her own house." Brenda's expression hardened. "My backyard is being renovated. There's construction equipment everywhere. It's impossible." "That sounds like a personal problem, not a reason to commandeer my property." I started walking back toward my door. "The answer is no, Patrick." Brenda's voice rose sharply. "I really don't think you understand the position you're putting yourself in. As HOA president, I have certain authorities regarding property use for community events." I turned back. "Show me in the bylaws where it says you can force a homeowner to host a private wedding." Her jaw clenched. "It's not about force. It's about community spirit and cooperation." "Still no. Have a good day, ladies." I went inside and closed the door, watching through the window as Brenda's face turned an impressive shade of red. She had an animated conversation with her friends, pointing at my house aggressively before they finally left. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next day, I found a formal letter in my mailbox from the HOA. It informed me that my front lawn was in violation of Section 12, Subsection 4 of the Community Guidelines due to unapproved shade variation inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic standards. The fine was $150, payable within 14 days. I walked out to my lawn and stared at it. The grass looked perfect. I'd hired a lawn service company specifically because I traveled occasionally for work and didn't want HOA violations. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. I called the lawn service. "Hey, this is Patrick Whitmore on Saguaro Drive. Can you tell me when you last serviced my lawn?" "Let me check, Mr. Whitmore. That was yesterday morning. Everything looked great. Is there a problem?" "No, you guys are fine. Thanks." I hung up and took photos of my lawn from every angle, then checked the HOA bylaws online. Section 12, subsection 4, stated that lawns should be uniformly green and well-maintained with no bare patches exceeding 6 inches in diameter. My lawn met every requirement. I wrote a formal response disputing the violation, attached my photos and the lawn service receipt, and submitted it through the HOA portal. The system confirmed receipt and stated I'd hear back within 5 business days. 3 days later, I got another violation notice. This time it was for my house numbers being improperly displayed. My house numbers were the same bronze medal numbers that came with the house when I bought it, identical to half the houses on my street. That evening, my neighbor Diego knocked on my door. Diego Ramirez lived 2 houses down, retired teacher in his 60s who'd been in the neighborhood for 15 years. "Patrick, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure, come in." He glanced around outside before stepping in, like he was worried about being watched. "I heard about what's happening with Brenda. The wedding thing? Yeah, it's ridiculous. She came to me first, actually, wanted to use my yard. When I said no, I got 4 violations in 2 weeks. Cost me almost $600 in fines before I finally caved and volunteered to coordinate the neighborhood watch program for a year. She withdrew the violations the next day. My stomach dropped. She's extorting people? Been doing it for at least 3 years that I know of. Usually it's smaller stuff, getting people to volunteer for her projects or donate to her causes. But she's ruthless if you crossed her." Diego looked genuinely worried. "I'm telling you this as a friend. Brenda doesn't lose. She's got the HOA board in her pocket. They're all her friends from the country club. Your best bet is to either give in or sell your house. I'm not doing either of those things. Then lawyer up because she's to make your life hell." Diego sighed. "I'm sorry, man. I wish more people would stand up to her. But most of us just can't afford the fight." After Diego left, I spent 2 hours reading through every page of the HOA bylaws and my property deed. There had to be something I could use. The bylaws gave the HOA president broad authority over community standards and events, but nothing that would legally allow forcing a homeowner to host a private wedding. The violation process required photographic evidence and a review period with the option to dispute before the full board. I documented everything. Every violation notice went into a folder with my photographic evidence showing compliance. I responded to each one formally, citing the specific bylaw requirements and proving I met them. The process was exhausting and time-consuming, but I wasn't going to give Brenda the satisfaction of backing down. A week before the supposed wedding date, I received a certified letter. This one informed me that the HOA board had voted to designate my front lawn as a temporary community event space for the weekend of Melissa's wedding under Emergency Community Clause authority. Any interference with the event would result in a $5,000 fine and potential legal action. I read the letter 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. Then I called a real estate attorney named Marcus Chen, whose office was in Phoenix. His paralegal scheduled me for the next morning. Marcus was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and an office that looked like a paper explosion had happened recently. "HOA dispute? How'd you know?" "You've got that specific look of rage mixed with disbelief. I see it a lot." He gestured for me to sit. "Tell me everything." I walked him through the whole situation, showing him every violation notice, every response, and the certified letter about the Emergency Community Clause. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Okay, so the good news is she's completely full of it. There's no legal mechanism for an HOA to commandeer private property for a personal event, emergency clause or not. That clause is meant for things like utility access during repairs or emergency vehicle passage during natural disasters. A wedding qualify under any interpretation. Can she actually fine me $5,000? She can try, but it wouldn't hold up in court. However, fighting it would cost you money and time, which is exactly what she's counting on. Most people settle because litigation is expensive and exhausting. Marcus tapped his pen on his desk. The violation notices are harassment, plain and simple. You're clearly in compliance with the actual bylaws, but here's the thing about HOA disputes. Even when you're right, proving it through official channels can take months and cost thousands. So what do I do? Well, you've got a few options. One, you could get an emergency restraining order preventing them from using your property. Two, you could file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They oversee HOA conduct. Three, you could just let them try to have the wedding and sue them afterward for property trespass. Marcus paused. Or four, you could make it physically impossible for them to have the wedding without directly violating their bogus order. What do you mean? If your property has a legitimate maintenance emergency that requires work during their scheduled event, well, that's just unfortunate timing, isn't it? Marcus's expression stayed professionally neutral, but his eyes showed a hint of amusement. When's the last time you had your septic system serviced? My house, like about 30% of the homes in Desert Bloom Estates, wasn't connected to the main sewer line. We had septic systems which required regular maintenance. It's been about 2 years, actually. It's probably due. Septic cleanouts are messy, loud, and they smell terrible. They also typically take several hours and require large trucks parked on the property, with hoses running across the lawn. Marcus pulled up something on his computer. I know a guy who runs a septic service company. Very reliable, professional, always available for emergency calls. If you were to discover your system was backing up and needed immediate service, say, early in the morning on the day of this supposed wedding, well, that would be a legitimate emergency. I felt a smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. That's genius. I didn't suggest anything. I simply mentioned that property maintenance is your right and responsibility as a homeowner. Marcus wrote down a phone number. This is my buddy Terrence. Tell him I sent you. And Patrick, document everything that happens. Photos, videos, save every email and text. If Brenda pushes this into actual litigation, you'll want a paper trail showing her harassment pattern. I left Marcus's office feeling better than I had in days. Instead of being backed into a corner, I had a plan. And if Brenda wanted to play hardball with my property, she was about to learn that I could swing back. That evening, I called Terrence Wade, the septic service guy. He had a deep, friendly voice and laughed when I explained the situation. Marcus told me about you. Yeah, I can help. Your system's probably due for service anyway if it's been 2 years. These things should be pumped every 3 to 5 years depending on usage. I've got an opening next Saturday morning, which I believe is when this wedding is supposed to happen. 8 in the morning work? Perfect. I'll bring the big truck. Fair warning, the process is loud and the smell is something else. We'll need to park the truck in your driveway and run hoses across the front lawn to access the tank. Usually takes 4 to 5 hours for a full service and inspection. I'll need you to sign off that this is legitimate maintenance, not just revenge. It's completely legitimate. Like you said, it's been 2 years, then we're good. I'll email you a service contract tonight. Standard rate, nothing shady. This is real work that needs doing. After hanging up with Terrence, I felt almost cheerful. I spent the evening taking more photographs of my property and downloading all my security camera footage from the past 2 weeks. My doorbell camera and backyard camera had captured several instances of Brenda and her friends walking around my property without permission, measuring and planning. On Thursday, 5 days before the wedding, a moving truck pulled up to my house at 7 in the morning. I watched in disbelief as workers started unloading white folding chairs onto my lawn. I ran outside. Hey, what are you doing? The lead worker, a tired-looking guy in his 40s, checked his clipboard. Delivery for the Mitchell wedding. We're setting up chairs and tables. This is my property, and I didn't authorize this. He looked confused and pulled out his phone, calling someone. After a brief conversation, he handed me the phone. Lady wants to talk to you, Patrick. Brenda's voice was syrupy sweet. The delivery company is just doing their job. We're setting up for Saturday. Per the HOA authorization, we have access to the property starting today. No, you don't. If you don't remove these people from my lawn in the next 5 minutes, I'm calling the police. That would be very unwise. You'd be in violation of the HOA order, and the fines would be substantial. Your HOA order is fake and unenforceable. 5 minutes, Brenda. I hung up and handed the phone back to the worker. I'm sorry you got dragged into this, but you need to pack up and leave. This is a civil dispute between me and the HOA, and this is private property. If those chairs aren't back on the truck in 5 minutes, I'm calling the Scottsdale Police Department for trespassing. The worker looked between me and his truck, clearly calculating his options. Look, man, we get paid either way. I'm not getting in the middle of this. He called to his crew. Pack it up, wrong address. I watched as they loaded everything back onto the truck. Then I did call the police non-emergency line. I explained the situation and asked if I could file a report documenting the attempted trespass. The dispatcher said an officer would come by within the hour to take my statement. Officer Jennifer Kowalski arrived 40 minutes later. She was professional and patient, listening to the whole story while taking notes. Do you have documentation of your refusal and their attempts to use your property anyway? I showed her everything, the original conversation, the violation notices, the certified letter, the security footage of Brenda and her friends on my property, and the delivery truck incident from that morning. Officer Kowalski reviewed it all carefully. Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to be straight with you. This is primarily a civil matter between you and your HOA. However, the repeated unauthorized entry onto your property and the attempt to deliver items without your consent could potentially constitute trespassing and harassment. I'm going to file this report, and I'd recommend you also document this with your HOA management company and consider getting a formal cease and desist letter from an attorney. I've already consulted with a lawyer. He's preparing documentation. Good. If they show up on Saturday and try to set up without your permission, call 911. With this report on file, we'll have context for the situation. She handed me a case number. Keep your cameras running and don't engage physically with anyone. Just call us and let us handle it. After she left, I called Marcus and told him what happened. He sighed heavily. She's either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid. I'm guessing arrogant. Let me draft a cease and desist letter and send it certified mail. It won't stop her, but it'll strengthen your position if this goes to court. Friday afternoon, the day before the wedding, my doorbell rang. I checked the camera and saw Melissa Mitchell, Brenda's daughter, standing there. She was around 26, wearing jeans and a nervous expression that was nothing like her mother's aggressive confidence. I opened the door but stayed in the doorway. Can I help you? Mr. Whitmore, I'm Melissa. I know you know who I am. She twisted her hands together. Can we talk for a minute, please? Something about her demeanor made me step aside. Come in. She sat on the edge of my couch like she might need to run at any moment. I need you to know I had no idea about any of this. My mom told me she'd found a beautiful outdoor venue through her HOA connections, and it was all arranged. I didn't know she was forcing you to host it. I only found out yesterday when my fiancé mentioned seeing something on the neighborhood Facebook page about a dispute. Your mom's been harassing me for 2 weeks. I know. I confronted her this morning and we had a huge fight. She kept saying you were being unreasonable and that she was handling it. But when I pushed, she admitted you'd said no from the beginning. Melissa looked close to tears. Mr. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. This is exactly the kind of thing my mom does. She decides what she wants and bulldozes everyone to get it. I've been trying to set boundaries with her for years, but planning this wedding has been a nightmare. She's taken over everything. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to cancel tomorrow. I told my mom we need to postpone and find a real venue, but she's refusing. She says everything's paid for, guests are traveling in, it's too late to change. She's acting like tomorrow is definitely happening here. Melissa met my eyes. I can't stop her, I've tried. But I wanted you to know that I'm not part of this, and I'm horrified by what she's doing. And I wanted to warn you that she's planning to show up tomorrow morning at 6 with the setup crew. She thinks if she gets everything set up before you wake up, you won't make a scene in front of the guests. I appreciate you telling me. I considered for a moment. For what it's worth, I'm sorry your wedding got caught up in this. That's not fair to you. It's my own fault for letting my mom control everything. Melissa stood up. I should go before she realizes I came here. Good luck tomorrow, Mr. Whitmore. I hope you send her running. After she left, I texted Terrence. They're planning to show up at 6 a.m. Can you be here at 5:30? His response came back immediately. Absolutely, this is going to be fun. I barely slept Friday night. I kept checking my security cameras every hour, worried Brenda might try something in the middle of the night. But nothing happened until 5:15 a.m., when I woke up to my alarm and made myself the strongest coffee I'd ever brewed. At 5:27 a.m., I heard the rumble of a large truck. I looked out to see Terrence pulling up in a massive septic service vehicle, complete with a huge tank and industrial equipment. A second guy was with him, probably his assistant. I went outside to meet them. The sky was just starting to lighten, the desert air still cool from the night. Morning! Morning! Terrence was a big guy with a beard and an infectious enthusiasm for his work. This is Carlos, my assistant. All right, let's get you signed off on the work order, and then we'll get started. Where's your access point? I showed them the septic tank access point on the side of my house. They'd need to run the hose from the truck across my front lawn, around the corner to the side yard. It was going to be very visible and very intrusive, exactly as planned. Perfect now, because we're doing a full service, this is going to be loud. The pump makes a hell of a noise, and we'll need to do some digging to fully access the tank. The smell's going to be rough too, especially once we open it up. You might want to stay inside. I'll be watching from the window. Terrence grinned. Wouldn't miss it either if I were you. All right, Carlos. Let's get the hose deployed. At exactly 5:45 a.m., they fired up the pump. The noise was incredible, a deep, grinding roar that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Lights started coming on in nearby houses. The hose was stretched across my entire front lawn, and Terrence and Carlos were working around the access point with shovels, making everything as visible and disruptive as possible while still doing legitimate work. At 6:03 a.m., Brenda's white Escalade pulled up, followed by 2 cargo vans. I watched from my living room window, coffee in hand, as she got out and froze, staring at the septic truck dominating my driveway and the industrial hose cutting across her would-be wedding venue. She marched up to Terrence. I couldn't hear over the pump noise, but I could see her shouting, gesturing at the truck and the equipment. Terrence shook his head and kept working. She got more animated, and I saw him point at me inside the house. My doorbell rang. I took my time walking to it. Brenda was vibrating with rage when I opened the door. What the hell do you think you're doing? Having my septic system serviced. It's been 2 years. It's due for maintenance. Today, right now, this is deliberate sabotage. This is property maintenance. There's nothing in the HOA bylaws that says I can't service my septic system. I kept my voice calm and reasonable. In fact, proper maintenance is required to keep the property in good condition. You can't do this. We have a wedding in 8 hours. There are 200 guests coming. Then I guess you should have booked an actual venue instead of trying to steal my property. I started to close the door. She stuck her foot in the doorway. I will bury you in fines. The HOA will take everything you have. Get your foot out of my door, Brenda, or I'm calling the police again. You miserable, selfish police. Now. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. She jerked her foot back and I closed the door, actually making the call this time. Through the window, I watched chaos unfold. More vehicles arrived. A catering truck, a florist van, the tent company. Each one pulled up, saw the septic operation, and looked confused. Brenda was running between them, trying to organize something. But what could she do? My entire front lawn was a work zone. Smell was starting to permeate the air, that distinctive septic odor that makes your nose wrinkle and your stomach turn. By 6:30, Officer Kowalski was back, along with another officer. I met them outside and explained the situation. Terrence came over too, showing them his legitimate work order and service contract. Officer Kowalski turned to Brenda. Madam, this is private property, and the homeowner has every right to conduct maintenance. I understand you have an event planned, but based on the report from yesterday, you were told this property wasn't available. The HOA authorized it. I have documentation. Brenda shoved papers at the officer. Officer Kowalski reviewed them. These appear to be internal HOA documents. They don't supersede property rights or give you legal authority to use someone else's property without consent. The homeowner has clearly refused consent and has documented that refusal. If you attempt to set up your event here against his wishes, you'll be trespassing, and we'll have to take action. This is harassment. He's doing this deliberately. He's conducting scheduled maintenance on his own property. That's not harassment." The officer's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Madam, I strongly suggest you find an alternative location for your event. If you're still here in an hour and haven't left peacefully, we'll be issuing citations." I watched Brenda's face cycle through rage, disbelief, and finally something close to panic. The reality was setting in. Her daughter's wedding was supposed to start at 2 p.m., and she had no venue. Susan from the HOA board had arrived at some point and was standing beside Brenda. "Can't you have the septic service people take a break for a few hours?" Terrence answered that one. "No, madam. Once we've opened the system, we have to complete the service for health and safety reasons. Plus, the smell gets worse as we work. This is going to be going for at least 4 more hours, probably 5. By 7 a.m., the sun was fully up, and more neighbors had come out to watch the spectacle. Diego gave me a subtle thumbs up from his driveway. A few others looked amused. Some looked sympathetic to Brenda, but no one offered to host the wedding at their house, I noticed. Brenda made phone calls frantically, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk. The vendors were getting restless, needing direction. The tent company left after 15 minutes, saying they couldn't set up on an active work site and needed to know where to go. The caterers followed shortly after. At 7:30, Melissa arrived in a small sedan, her fiancé driving. She got out and took in the scene: the septic truck, the industrial hose, the smell, her mother on the phone near tears with frustration, the police cruiser still parked nearby. She walked up to me. "Thank you," I blinked. "For ruining your wedding? For standing up to her?" Melissa looked over at her mother. "Tom and I talked last night. We're going to the courthouse on Monday and getting married there, just us and 2 witnesses. This whole circus has been about her, not us. Maybe this is exactly what needed to happen." Her fiancé Tom came over and shook my hand. "Sorry you got dragged into our family drama. I'm sorry your wedding got caught in it. Honestly, we wanted something small anyway. Mrs. Mitchell had other plans." Tom didn't sound particularly upset about the situation. Melissa walked over to her mother. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw Brenda's expression crumble. Melissa said something firm, her posture straight, and then walked back to the car with Tom. They drove away, leaving Brenda standing there looking lost for the first time since I'd met her. Susan approached Brenda and said something, putting a hand on her shoulder. Brenda shook her off violently and got in her Escalade, slamming the door hard enough that I heard it over the pump noise. She peeled out, tires squealing. Susan walked over to me, looking tired. "I hope you're happy." "I'm satisfied that my property rights were respected, if that's what you mean. Brenda's been a good president. She gets things done. By bullying people and breaking the law, that's not leadership, that's tyranny." I crossed my arms. "I've documented every violation notice, every threatening email, every unauthorized entry onto my property. If the HOA tries to fine me, I'll see you in court, and I'll be filing a harassment complaint with the state." Susan's expression shifted to uncertainty. "We were just trying to help with a difficult situation." "No, you were helping Brenda abuse her authority. There's a difference." I softened my tone slightly. "Look, I don't have a problem with the HOA in general. I have a problem with being extorted and having my property stolen. If the board wants to operate legally and ethically, I'm fine. But if you keep backing Brenda's games, you're all going to end up in legal trouble." She left without responding, getting into her car and driving away. The remaining vendors followed over the next 30 minutes, all of them leaving to either cancel or relocate. By 9 a.m., the chaos was over. It was just me, Terrence, Carlos, and the septic truck. The smell was intense, but I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Terrence came over during a break in the work. "Well, that was entertaining. Your tank's in good shape, by the way. No problems, just routine cleaning. We should be done by noon. Thanks for coming through on this. Are you kidding? I'll be telling this story for years." He grinned. "Besides, I don't like bullies. My mom got harassed by her HOA in Tempe for 2 years before she finally moved. If I can help someone stand up to that garbage, I'm happy to do it." The rest of Saturday was quiet. Terrence and Carlos finished up just after noon, packed their equipment, and left me with a property that was fully serviced and undeniably unusable for a luxury wedding. I spent the afternoon doing regular chores and monitoring my security cameras, but nothing else happened. Sunday morning, I woke up to find my lawn covered in toilet paper. Classic vandalism, immature but not damaging. My cameras had caught 3 people doing it around 2 a.m., but they'd worn hoodies and masks, faces not visible. I suspected Brenda but couldn't prove it. I cleaned it up and added the footage to my documentation file. Monday, I called Marcus to update him. How do you want to proceed? I want to file a formal complaint against Brenda Mitchell and the HOA board for harassment, issue a cease and desist, and make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else in the neighborhood. I'll draw up the papers. Also, you might want to attend the next HOA board meeting. These things are open to all homeowners, and I bet it's going to be interesting. The next board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. I marked my calendar and spent the week working on my software projects, trying to get back to normal life. But normal was interrupted Wednesday afternoon when Diego knocked on my door again. Have you checked the neighborhood Facebook group? I hadn't. I rarely used Facebook and had forgotten I'd even joined the Desert Bloom Estates page. Diego showed me his phone. Brenda had posted a long, rambling message about how I had sabotaged a beautiful family event out of pure spite and refused to show basic community spirit. She'd spun the whole story to make herself the victim, claiming she'd simply asked to use my unused lawn space for a few hours, and I'd responded with deliberate cruelty. The post had 73 comments, about half supporting her and half questioning her version of events. Several people had jumped in defending me, including Diego, who'd posted about his own experience with Brenda's harassment. Others shared similar stories. One woman, Patricia Chen, wrote about getting 12 violation notices in a month after she refused to donate to Brenda's personal charity. Another guy, James Porter, described being threatened with fines because his trash cans were visible from the street for 20 minutes after the pickup time. The thread had devolved into a full-scale discussion about Brenda's conduct as HOA president. Some of her defenders argued that she kept the neighborhood looking nice and property values high. Others pointed out that fear and harassment weren't appropriate management tools. This is getting messy, Diego said. But honestly, it's been coming for a long time. People are scared of her, but they're also sick of her. Thursday's board meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance. I arrived 15 minutes early and found the parking lot already full. The meeting room was packed, at least 60 people crammed into a space meant for 30. Brenda sat at the front table with the other board members. Susan, a middle-aged man named Gregory Hastings, who was the treasurer, and a younger woman named Rachel Dominguez, who was the secretary. Brenda's expression was stone cold when she saw me walk in. The meeting started with routine business, budget updates, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules. Then they opened the floor for homeowner comments. I raised my hand. Brenda looked like she wanted to ignore me, but at least 20 people were watching, and she couldn't. Patrick Whitmore. I stood up. I want to address the incident from last Saturday and the pattern of harassment that led to it. I pulled out my folder of documentation. 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Mitchell informed me she was planning to hold her daughter's wedding on my front lawn without my consent. When I refused, I received a series of fraudulent violation notices, threats of thousands of dollars in fines, and unauthorized entry onto my property by her and her vendors. I have photographic evidence, security footage, and police reports documenting all of this. The room went silent. Brenda's face flushed red. That is a completely distorted version of events. Is it? Because I have the violation notices right here. Unapproved shade variation on my lawn, which my lawn service confirmed was in perfect condition. Improperly displayed house numbers that are identical to half the neighborhood. A fake emergency community clause authorizing seizure of my property for a private event. I held up papers as I spoke. I also have security footage of you and your friends measuring and photographing my property without permission after I'd already said no. Gregory leaned forward. Brenda, is this true? Patrick is being deliberately difficult and obstructive. I was trying to manage an emergency situation. Your venue double booking isn't an emergency that gives you rights to someone else's property, I interrupted. And it's not just me. Other homeowners are documenting similar harassment. I gestured around the room. Diego Ramirez got 4 violations in 2 weeks until he agreed to run the Neighborhood Watch program. Patricia Chen got 12 violations for refusing to donate to your charity. How many other people here have stories like that? At least 15 hands went up. Brenda looked shocked. Susan stared at the raised hands with a dawning expression of horror. An older woman in the back stood up. I got 6 violations when I opposed Brenda's proposal to change the neighborhood entrance landscaping. Every single one was bogus, but I paid the fines because I couldn't afford to fight them. I'm on a fixed income. Another man. My roof was supposedly the wrong shade according to a violation notice, even though it's the exact same shingles as 30 other houses here. The notice went away after I agreed to chair the holiday decoration committee. More stories poured out. Once people started talking, it was like a dam breaking. Years of frustration and intimidation spilled into the open. Brenda tried to interrupt several times, but the crowd wasn't having it. Even her supporters looked uncomfortable. Gregory called for order, banging a gavel. This is highly irregular. These are serious accusations. They're lies and exaggerations from people with grudges, Brenda said, but her voice lacked conviction. I have documentation for everything I've claimed, and I'm willing to bet others do too, I said. I've also consulted with an attorney who confirms that the HOA's actions constitute harassment and potentially fraud. The fake violations and threats were an abuse of authority for personal benefit. Rachel, the secretary, spoke up quietly. Brenda, did you actually try to seize Mr. Whitmore's property for Melissa's wedding? I didn't seize anything. I used legitimate HOA authority to designate temporary community space. For your daughter's private wedding? Rachel's eyebrows rose. That's not what that clause is for. I think we need to table this discussion and review the allegations formally, Gregory said. We'll need to examine the violation notices, the bylaws, and possibly consult with the HOA's attorney. I agree, Susan said, looking uncomfortable. This has gotten out of hand. The meeting continued for another hour, with more homeowners sharing complaints and concerns. By the end, the board voted to suspend issuing any new violation notices until they could review the enforcement procedures and standards. They also scheduled a special meeting in 2 weeks specifically to address the allegations against Brenda. As people filed out, several homeowners approached me to shake my hand or thank me. Diego clapped me on the shoulder. You did it, man. You actually stood up to her. We'll see. She's not gone yet. But the tide had turned. Over the next 2 weeks, the neighborhood Facebook group exploded with discussion. More people came forward with their experiences. Someone created a shared document where homeowners could list violations they'd received, and patterns became obvious. Brenda had targeted anyone who opposed her or refused her requests, using the violation system as a weapon. Patricia Chen, who'd written about her experience on Facebook, turned out to be an attorney herself, specializing in real estate law. She reached out to me and several other affected homeowners about a potential class action harassment suit. We have more than enough for a case. The pattern is clear and the damages are substantial. The special meeting 2 weeks later was even more packed than the previous one. Brenda arrived with her own attorney, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit, but the evidence was overwhelming. Gregory had reviewed all the disputed violations and found that over 40% of the violations issued during Brenda's presidency, were against homeowners who had opposed her on other issues or refused her requests. The pattern was statistically impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Mrs. Mitchell, Gregory said heavily, the board has reviewed the evidence and consulted with our HOA attorney. Your conduct has exposed the association to significant legal liability. The violations you've issued have been inconsistent with the bylaws, and your attempt to use Mr. Whitmore's property for a personal event was completely inappropriate. I was doing what was best for the community, Brenda said, but she sounded defeated. You were abusing your authority, Rachel said. I've been secretary for 3 years, and I've watched you bully people. I went along with it because I didn't want to be your next target, but I'm ashamed of that now. This has to stop. The board voted 3-1 with Brenda's dissent to remove her as president. They also voted to issue a formal apology to all homeowners who had received improper violations and to refund any fines paid. Gregory would serve as interim president until the next election. Brenda stood up, her face pale. You're all going to regret this. I've dedicated years to this neighborhood. You've terrorized people for years, Diego called out from the crowd. Good riddance. She left without another word, her attorney following. The meeting continued with discussions about reforming the violation process, adding more oversight, and requiring photographic evidence and multiple board member review before issuing notices. I left feeling vindicated but exhausted. The whole experience had been draining, even with the positive outcome. Marcus called me the next day. I heard about the meeting. Congratulations. Thanks. Is she going to sue me? Probably not. She doesn't have a case, and her attorney knows it. If anything, you'd have grounds to sue her for harassment, though I don't know if it's worth the energy. It's not. I just want to live in peace. Fair enough. But you did good, Patrick. Most people don't stand up to this kind of abuse. You changed things for a lot of people. Over the next few months, life in Desert Bloom Estates gradually normalized. Gregory proved to be a reasonable and fair president. The new violation process was transparent and consistent. Several longtime homeowners told me they felt like they could breathe again without constantly worrying about arbitrary fines. Brenda moved out of the neighborhood 3 months later. Rumor was she and her husband bought a house in Paradise Valley, a much more expensive area where maybe she'd blend in with other demanding personalities. Melissa and Tom did get married at the courthouse, according to a Facebook post Melissa made with a photo of them on the courthouse steps, both beaming. She'd captioned it, "Best decision we ever made. Small, simple, and actually about us." I liked the post and left a congratulatory comment. Diego hosted a neighborhood barbecue in July, and I actually went, which was unusual for me. I'm not typically a social person, but I figured I should make an effort. It was nice. People were relaxed and friendly, no underlying tension. No one mentioned Brenda, which felt right. She was in the past. Patricia Chen came over while I was getting a burger. Patrick, I wanted to tell you we're not pursuing the class action suit. Once Brenda was removed and the board issued refunds, most people felt satisfied. Sometimes the accountability is enough. That's probably healthier than dragging it through court for 2 years. Exactly, she smiled. But the offer stands if anything else happens. We've got documentation now. As summer turned to fall, I settled into the routine I'd wanted from the beginning. My work went well. I kept my lawn maintained without harassment, and I even made a few friends in the neighborhood. Diego and I started having coffee occasionally on Saturday mornings, talking about everything from sports to politics to the best Mexican food in Scottsdale. My septic system, ironically, became a neighborhood legend. Terrence told the story at a local bar, and somehow it made it to a Phoenix Reddit thread, then to a local news blog's collection of best HOA horror stories. My house became known as the place where that wedding disaster happened. I didn't mind. It was kind of funny in retrospect. In December, almost a year after the whole incident started, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Melissa. Dear Mr. Whitmore, I wanted to write to thank you again for standing up to my mother. I know at the time it seemed like you were ruining my wedding, but you actually saved me from making a huge mistake. The wedding she was planning wasn't what Tom and I wanted. It was her fantasy, her guest list, her vision. We were just props in her production. Our courthouse wedding was perfect. We spent the money we saved on a honeymoon in Costa Rica instead of on centerpieces and place cards. And more importantly, I finally set real boundaries with my mother. Our relationship is better now than it's been in years because she knows I won't tolerate her controlling behavior anymore. She's still not happy about any of it, and she probably never will be. But that's her issue to work through, not mine. You showed me that it's okay to say no to unreasonable demands even from family. Especially from family sometimes. I hope you're doing well, and that the neighborhood is treating you better. Thank you for being the immovable object that my irresistible force mother finally crashed into. Best wishes, Melissa and Tom. I stuck the letter on my fridge where it's for months. It was a good reminder that standing your ground, even when it's difficult and messy, can be the right thing to do. The HOA operated smoothly through the next year. The new violation process worked well, catching actual problems like overgrown landscaping or broken fences while not weaponizing minor issues. Property values stayed stable. The neighborhood looked good. Turned out you could maintain standards without terrorizing residents who knew. In the spring, elections were held for new board positions. Gregory chose not to run for a full term as president, saying he'd only stepped up temporarily. A woman named Linda Fitzgerald won the presidency, running on a platform of transparency and fair enforcement. Diego got elected to the board as well, which I thought was fitting given his experience with the previous regime. Life moved on. My software business grew. I traveled for a few client meetings, always coming back to find my house exactly as I'd left it. No surprise violation notices or unwanted events on my property. It was the peace I'd been looking for when I bought the house in the first place. Sometimes when I was out watering my lawn or getting the mail, neighbors would nod to me with a look of respect that hadn't been there before. I'd become the guy who took down Brenda Mitchell, and while I hadn't been looking for that reputation, I understood what it meant to them. Someone had finally said no and made it stick. Diego and I were having coffee one Saturday morning in September, sitting on my back patio, when he brought it up directly. "You know you changed this neighborhood, right? Not just getting rid of Brenda, but showing people they don't have to accept abuse from authority figures." "I just didn't want a wedding on my lawn," he laughed. "Yeah, but you could have rolled over. Most people do. It's easier. But you didn't, and that mattered. There are probably a dozen people in this neighborhood who stood up for themselves on other things this year because they saw you do it first." I thought about that. Maybe it's contagious. Basic self-respect should be standard, but it's not, especially in HOAs. People get ground down by the bureaucracy and the fines and just start complying even when the rules are garbage. Diego took a sip of his coffee. "Anyway, I just wanted to say thanks. My last few years here have been way less stressful, and that's partly because of what you did. You backed me up in that meeting, that mattered too. Somebody had to, glad we both did." As fall turned to winter, I found myself genuinely enjoying living in Desert Bloom Estates. The neighborhood had a holiday party in December, voluntary. No pressure to attend, and I went for an hour, socialized, and left without drama. It was normal in the best way. I thought about Brenda occasionally, wondering if she'd learned anything from the experience or if she was terrorizing a new neighborhood in Paradise Valley. Probably the latter, knowing her personality type. Some people never change, they just find new victims. But at least she wasn't doing it here anymore. My septic system continued to function perfectly, which Terrence said was guaranteed for another 3 to 5 years. "You've got a well-maintained system," he told me during that infamous Saturday morning. "Should give you no trouble." He'd been right about that, as he was about the whole situation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brenda had tried to use my property for something beautiful, a wedding, a celebration of love and family. Instead, I'd fought back with something that literally dealt with waste. There was probably some metaphor there about beauty and ugliness, about what happens when you try to force your vision on someone else's property, but I wasn't going to overthink it. The simple truth was that I'd defended what was mine, and I'd done it legally and effectively. The septic cleanout was the perfect solution. Legitimate, impossible to argue with, and absolutely ruinous to a luxury wedding. Brenda had gambled that I wouldn't fight back effectively, and she'd lost. In February, almost 18 months after the wedding incident, I got an email from the HOA board. Linda was writing to announce that the association was implementing new bylaws that explicitly protected homeowner property rights and created an appeals process for violation notices. Several of the changes were directly inspired by what happened with Brenda, though the email didn't name her specifically. These changes ensure that no homeowner will be subject to harassment or abuse of authority by the board or its officers, Linda wrote. "We're committed to fair, transparent governance that protects both community standards and individual rights." I replied, thanking her for the reforms and offering to help if they needed input. It felt good to see something positive and lasting come out of the whole mess. Life continued. Spring brought warm weather and blooming desert flowers. My lawn looked great, professionally maintained and completely free of wedding chairs or tents. I'd sometimes sit on my front porch in the evening, beer in hand, and just appreciate the quiet. My property, my rules, my peace. Diego hosted another barbecue that April, bigger than the previous year. I helped with the grilling, flipping burgers, and talking with neighbors who'd become actual friends rather than just people who lived nearby. We told stories, laughed, complained about Arizona summer heat coming soon, and didn't mention HOA politics once. It was perfect. That's when I realized Brenda's greatest failure wasn't just losing her position or leaving the neighborhood. It was that she'd built nothing lasting except fear, and once she was gone, that fear evaporated. The neighborhood didn't fall apart without her iron fist. Property values didn't crash. The streets stayed clean. Life went on better than before because people could relax and just be normal neighbors instead of subjects in her petty kingdom. Standing at that barbecue, listening to genuine laughter and easy conversation, I felt satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with revenge. I'd protected my property and my rights, yes, but in doing so, I'd helped create space for something better to grow. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, no place is, but it was healthier, more honest, and definitely less terrifying. The septic truck showing up that Saturday morning had been loud, smelly, and unquestionably disruptive. It had ruined a wedding and humiliated someone who probably still resented me. But it had also been necessary, both for legitimate property maintenance and for sending an unmistakable message. You can't just take what isn't yours, no matter who you are or what position you hold. In the end, that was the story. Not about revenge or even justice, really, just about boundaries and what happens when you enforce them firmly and legally. Brenda had spent years crossing other people's boundaries, and she'd gotten away with it until she met someone who refused to move. I just happened to be that person, and I happened to have a septic system that needed servicing on exactly the right day. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things. Sometimes standing your ground smells terrible and sounds awful and looks ridiculous. But sometimes it's still absolutely the right thing to do, and you just have to live with the temporary discomfort to get to the lasting peace. My lawn remained wedding-free, my septic system remained functional, and my property remained mine. Those were victories worth celebrating, even if they came wrapped in industrial hose and eau de sewage. And every time I saw that section of lawn where the hose had been stretched out, creating a faint worn path in the grass that eventually filled in, I smiled, remembering the look on Brenda's face when she realized her perfect plan had been defeated by basic homeowner maintenance. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following years. New families moved in, hearing about Desert Bloom Estates as a well-managed community with reasonable HOA leadership, a stark change from its reputation during Brenda's reign. The story of the septic wedding became neighborhood lore, told and retold at gatherings with varying degrees of accuracy and embellishment. I didn't mind. It kept the lesson fresh. Don't abuse power and don't mess with people's property rights. Linda served 2 excellent terms as HOA president before stepping down to focus on her business. Diego took over after that, bringing his teaching background to the role with patience and fairness. The neighborhood thrived in ways that had nothing to do with iron-fisted control and everything to do with mutual respect. I kept living my life, working on software projects, maintaining my property, and occasionally telling the story when new neighbors asked about the legendary septic incident. Each time I told it, I emphasized the same points. Know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to stand up to bullies even when they have official titles. Because at the end of the day, that Saturday morning with the septic truck rumbling and Brenda's wedding plans crumbling wasn't about pettiness or revenge. It was about the fundamental principle that your home is your castle, and no HOA president or community authority gets to override that without your consent. Sometimes defending that principle requires creativity, perfect timing, and a really good septic service company. The smell eventually faded. The memory never did, and that was exactly how it should be.